Yeah, everybody, welcome to Ally 101, or how to be a supportive, effective LGBTQ plus ally. This comes to you as part of our Solidarity Week. Solidarity Week, we are following from GLSEN, and if you're thinking to yourself, I think there was an event last year that was called Ally Week. What happened to Ally Week? You're correct. That has been changed as of this year. In the past, GLSEN has hosted an Ally Week, which focused on being an ally to the LGBTQ community, but due to sort of rising a political wave of understanding the role of racism, of white supremacy, of the need for social justice, not only in the LGBTQ community, but sort of intersectionally dealing with racial, cultural, ethnic questions as well. GLSEN has incorporated those efforts for social justice on those fronts into this event, so that Solidarity Week encourages everyone within the community and outside of it to practice solidarity with different kinds of marginalized identities. And so as part of Solidarity Week, Lamar, and specifically we as the Office of Global Diversity and Inclusive Excellence are celebrating by highlighting different identities throughout the week as part of focus days following GLSEN's schedule. So if you'd like to see that schedule, you can check out our Facebook page. I'll also show it at the end of the presentation. So that's Solidarity Week, and as part of that event, we're doing this ally workshop, but also at the end of the week, our LGBTQ plus student group will be hosting a National Coming Out Day, and that'll be in the Setzer Center, where they'll have a photo booth and also some information and giveaways and that sort of thing. So do go support them this Friday. That'll be from 10 to 12, I believe. So more information on the Facebook page. We've also posted Monday's information. Today's focus day is Black LGBTQ plus community members. So we've got some information on that. We've got also a spotlight on Audrey Lord, so a little bit of information there. Super excited about that. Back into Ally 101. I also wanted to give just a tiny bit about myself, just to kind of establish some ethos. Who am I to be teaching about Ally 101? My name is Lauren S. Wilson. I am a Lamar alum, but I also have my master's degree in English literature and language. And my study focus when I was getting my master's degree and when I was doing my research there was on queer literature, specifically queer time and queer spectrality. So dealing with the ways that experiences of time can be communicated or talked about in relation to heteronormative understandings of time, and how that can kind of manifest in ghostliness and that sort of thing. So that's sort of my research focus. I'm also a bisexual woman, though I am in a straight passing relationship, so I recognize that I have lots of privilege myself, and I try to use that privilege and understand that my role is mostly as an ally, as far as doing work in the LGBTQ plus community. So that's me. And to get into sort of presentation, I also compiled a list of a very, very limited list of terms to know that sort of came up as I was writing my presentation. These are very basic, but I feel like, to sort of even get started in the conversation, there are a lot of terms to kind of have in your belt, in your toolbox. So the first set of those terms would be ally versus accomplice. This is Ally 101. That's sort of the most basic term for what we do when we want to team up with marginalized communities and support them and lift them up. So allyship is sort of the baseline for that, but there is kind of a conversation, especially with changing political climates, where we are shifting from allyship to being an accomplice, meaning instead of simply sort of passively or considering ourselves a kind of permanent ally as like an identity, being an accomplice means sort of taking on a set of actions, a pattern of behavior, of constantly showing up and being sort of in the trenches, on the front lines of advocating for positive change. So that's what I mean when I say accomplice versus ally. Ally is still a positive term, but accomplice is sort of a way of signifying that further action. So LGBTQ plus, sometimes known as the alphabet soup, stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, so gender questioning or sexuality questioning. And then the plus has a series of letters under it as well. IAP are often added, I being intersex, A being asexual or aromantic, and then P being pansexual, and then the plus sort of indicating a blanket term, all identities that fall under this sort of umbrella of queerness. I also add queer. There is a conversation around this word as, you know, it has been used historically as a slur, but lately the conversation has sort of shifted to where queerness is taken up as a positive term by the community, as something that can describe queer theory, queer scholarship, queer spaces, as a positive term that's extremely inclusive, that doesn't have to be sort of individually laid out by letter. But both, I think, are acceptable. And then we've got a few other words, heteronormative, which indicates the way that the norms or the way that the world is set up to be comfortable to people who are heterosexual, who are also cisgender, and I added that as well to the list, cisgender being comfortable identifying with the sex that was assigned to you at birth. So that's cisgender, and some people, there's been a backlash actually against cisgender as being used as a slur, but it's important for allies to understand that naming non-trans people, people who meet the norm, is important. Naming everyone and being able to have language that doesn't just single out people that are marginalized is helpful and necessary. And by that note, cishet is just cisgender plus heterosexual. So then we've got a couple of others, misgendering, dead naming, microaggressions. These are all kind of under the same umbrella. Microaggressions can apply to LGBTQ people, but also to people of different races, different cultures. These are just the tiny things that you do, and sometimes not so tiny, right? There are macroaggressions or larger violences that are more visibly nameable as violences, physically hurting someone or calling them slurs, but microaggressions can sometimes pass under the rug. These are the things that we as allies need to understand and notice when we do it or when other people do it. So those can include misgendering and dead naming. So trans folks, non-binary folks that do not identify with their assigned gender or as assigned sex at birth. For those people, using the wrong pronoun or using the wrong name or identifying them as the gender that they don't identify with can be extremely harmful to them. And those fall under microaggressions. We'll talk a little bit about that later under some different headings. And then the last that I added to this list was privilege, which also can spark some controversy online. But privilege it doesn't mean that, anything has been necessarily handed to you or that, you've got any, it doesn't mean that you were born rich or anything like that, right? Privilege just means that whatever you have privilege in, the system is sort of set up for you. So if the system is set up for, being comfortable being white or being heterosexual, if everything sort of goes along and supports that identity or that part of you, then that is a privilege that you have. It just means that it's not something that's actively working against you. Great, so, and then here on this page, I also included the Daniel Quasar redesign of the Pride flag. So you may remember the old Pride flag was just a rainbow flag. It's obviously still in use, but this new redesign incorporates a few new stripes to include trans representation, and then also black and brown stripes to, again, include everyone, be more inclusive, and to recognize that racial and cultural struggles are also a part of the struggle for equity and equality. Okay, so my first sort of big note for this ally training is to educate yourself. I think that's the most important part of being an ally, and more so to take the initiative in educating yourself. So essentially, one of the main issues that LGBTQ people may notice about allies who are trying very hard to be allies, trying very hard to be the best that they can be for the community, still where they'll struggle, where they'll falter is putting too much of the burden on LGBTQ people to be the people that are educating. So those marginalized people, while also having to deal with all of the struggles that they uniquely face, are also asked to be the ones that are teaching, the ones to go out and sort of give that information, go the extra step, and take on all of that burden on themselves. So for allies, it's important that we educate ourselves, go out and find out the information that we need to know, and also educate others. Okay, so also I've included examining your beliefs, working to unlearn harmful stereotypes, expectations, myths, misinformation, that sort of thing. So again, I ask us all to sort of start with ourselves, to think about the ways that we might be committing microaggressions, the ways that we might be, if not sort of being neutral, or if not harming, then not helping. So in the same way that we all need to sort of be more than just not racist, we need to be anti-racist. I think the same goes for LGBTQ and other marginalized identities. We need to actively face the unconscious bias, the things that we think and the things that we believe, but we don't sort of realize on a conscious level. So examine those, work to unlearn them. Educate yourself. Also, I say grow your understanding of the role of heteronormativity and that impact that it has. So essentially, certainly in my scholarship, as I've talked about, we see that how heteronormativity isn't just a nothingness, it is a force that impacts all of us. And even though it may be comfortable for some, it's extremely uncomfortable for others. Start to notice as a good ally when you see places where there is friction, because it may not be something that you notice. It can be small things, right? It can be things like just asking questions that seem really well meant, right? When are you gonna have kids, or something like that, right? Something small that can rub against somebody that doesn't live in the same sort of patterns that you do. And then lastly, learn about and be aware of changes in language, what's appropriate and what is not. So language is constantly changing, and language matters so much, especially in the LGBTQ plus community, where language hasn't always been there. Sometimes you have to make it, sometimes you have to change it. So being aware of what words are inappropriate, what words are slurs, what words are hurtful or harmful, in addition to people's personal words like pronouns, names, that sort of thing. Be aware of how those things impact people and how they impact yourself. So yeah, just be aware of those, look them up again. I always like to think about this sort of thing in the teacher sense of ask three before me. Teachers will often ask their students to ask your brain, ask your books, and then ask your buddy before asking the teacher. In this case, you can think of it as, you know, your LGBTQ plus friend. For sure, ask them questions if they're appropriate, but always sort of look to other sources first if you can. And then I've got my next slide is still educate yourself. I thought this was a big point, so it merited more than one slide. One of those things is also just knowing the history of LGBTQ plus oppression, those issues that they face, what are the problems that are constantly still coming up for LGBTQ plus people. Be aware and beware of a narrative of history that lets you believe that things are always getting better, that progress is always happening and it's inevitable, because it isn't. Make sure that you're aware of the history, but also the things that are coming up and rebounding, and how you can get involved. And that also involves my second point about policies. So learn about the policies, learn about how politics impacts LGBTQ plus people, what are the things that are changing, and how, again, can you get involved. And then my last point is just be discerning about your sources. There's a lot of information out there, not all of it is real and not all of it is good. So always be careful about what you're reading. Make sure that your sample size is good. Check out the sources. My one sort of story about that would be that I see a lot of people talking about transgender people, and they'll bring up studies, but if you look into the studies about, and they'll be talking about people that detransition at enormous rates, or that, you know, that they were never really trans, that sort of thing. But if you look into the studies that they're citing, a lot of times they'll come from religious organizations that have a certain agenda. They'll be interviewing parents of the children instead of the children themselves. Those sorts of flaws in the data can vastly change the way that we see what's real and what's not when it comes to the science and the realities behind LGBTQ plus experience. Okay, I added just a few did you know points just to kind of underscore the problems that our LGBTQ plus communities are facing. A lot of these come from the latest Trevor Project survey, which the Trevor Project, if you don't know, is a project that's involved with preventing young people in the LGBTQ plus community suicidality, studying that, learning about it, and preventing it. Sadly, their data is really austere. They talk about over 40% of LGBTQ plus youth seriously having considered suicide in the last year. 48% of LGBTQ plus youth have engaged in self-harm. 1 in 3 have reported having been physically threatened or harmed for their identity. And then a significant portion, I believe over 29% have experienced homelessness, have been kicked out of their homes, or they've run away. I also included a couple of political points from the last couple of years. Just this year, the Trump administration finalized removing an important non-discrimination protection against transgender and LGBTQ plus people, basically wherein healthcare providers can refuse care to non-cis people. So they're no longer protected. People are no longer protected based on their gender identity. Okay, and then also in April of last year, the Trump administration issued a ban on transgender people from serving in the military, just a blanket ban, including people that are already serving. And then I also included an article about employment and housing discrimination among LGBTQ plus people, particularly those that are people of color. Okay, my next sort of point is not only to educate yourself, but also to start taking notice and educating others. We've already talked about that, but I think it's important to start being able to notice and also being a force of good sort of in the community when you notice something isn't right. And to take it upon yourself, I mean, never to speak over people that are marginalized, but certainly to be willing to be that voice, and to not always have the 1 or 2 marginalized people in the room be the person to take on that issue. So basically, if you see something, say something. If you see a microaggression, point it out. Use it as a teachable moment, especially among the people that are in your closest circle, because these things can be really awkward. And especially for LGBTQ plus people, if they point out something that's wrong, if they point out a microaggression, those can be moments that incite violence or incite a moment of conflict. So be there and be the accomplice if you see something happening. And that can be as small as, a little joke, just a sort of slight misinformation. Just be there to be a helpful guide, or, a person in the way. A common strategy I see popping up online, which I really like, is if you start to see a big conflict happening where there's one person is just berating another person, sometimes it helps to just step in and just have a conversation with the person that's being victimized. Just be there and interrupt that moment so that you can de-escalate. And staying informed can be really helpful in these situations too. I had a situation not very long ago where a family member was posting this obvious fake news to me because I, am interested in this, I study it. And so there's, a rainbow flag and then an older person holding a child's hand. And it's basically trying to say that pedophilia is being added to the LGBTQ community and it's being supported. That's obviously absolutely not true. This is like a troll on the internet saying so, but my elderly aunt doesn't necessarily know the difference. So I can come in and say, hey, this is fake news. Here's the Snopes article about it. Just being there can be a big help because that kind of stuff spreads like wildfire on the internet, and it can even spread in real life. Yeah, and part of that is just using our privilege, like we said before. And we sort of talked about that already. Okay, my next point is just to be proactive. Not everything is reactive as an ally or an accomplice. Part of it is taking active steps to show people your support and to make things normalized, more comfortable for people that are making really complex or difficult decisions about their identities and coming out and that sort of thing. Part of that is just making it known that you're a supporter, making it known that you're an ally. This can be as simple as putting, a small rainbow in your office. It also helps to put your pronouns in your email signatures or to claim them on, if you're on LU Hub, for example, any kind of website where you can say your pronouns. It's helpful to do so even if you're cisgender. Maybe even especially if you're cisgender, just to start to normalize it, make it so that it's very easy for people who are making a big change in their public appearance to do that. It makes it much less of a struggle for them. So here I've included an example of what your signature might look like, a little sticker for safe space, just to show that support. Another thing is to use gender neutral language whenever you can, and to avoid sort of gendering things if it's possible, which should usually be the case. And if you're thinking to yourself, it's really difficult to ungender this situation, maybe it's also still helpful to examine that. Why is it so hard to take boys and girls out of this? What is the sort of complication in the way of that? I've included some fun gender neutral language you can use. I like folks, friends, pals. Y'all is an amazing word. I love that the South has that going for us, the one sort of gender neutral you term. I think that's great. And then of course they, them, spouse, partner, that sort of thing, just to give you an example of times where you might unconsciously use gendered language just because it's so written into our communities. Yeah, another thing would be, oops. I should just, okay. Another thing is just to be respectful of privacy and boundaries. We've talked about trying not to overburden people in marginalized communities by having them do too much of the work, but part of that also is just understanding that even though things might be different for you, no one really owes you an explanation of their identities. If somebody just identifies as queer, that's fine. If they don't want to answer, deep questions about their personal lives or their health or their bodies, that's something that you should definitely respect, that we should all respect and work to try and uphold those boundaries when we can. Most of us wouldn't really like it if we're asking us very personal questions about our bodies. So it's no different for people that are trans or non-binary or gay or lesbian or bisexual. Asking those really personal questions can be a real breach of boundaries and privacy. Another is to make room for LGBTQ plus representation. I was reading an article recently about gay bars and LGBTQ plus spaces being sort of overrun as tourist spots or places where cishet people will come in with good intentions, but at the end of the day, those queer spaces are being taken away or co-opted by people who don't need them. So trying to make room for that representation, trying to make room for those spaces is important and helpful to make sure that people are able to feel safe and feel represented. And then another point I made here is to learn ways to authentically support. There's a really great article in the Facebook post that we made today from Glisten, it's on their page as well, about different ways to sort of actually show up that aren't just sort of surface level pronouns or bathrooms. They're more about dealing with the whole person and recognizing how that there are ways that you can make people feel more safe in a sort of holistic manner. I think that's a great article to check out if you're looking for more information. I've added in a few quotes, and I believe this is actually from that article. So rather than getting used to trans and GNC, which is gender nonconforming individuals, support them authentically, ask them if they feel safe in your community, ask them if community members are displaying attitudes of acceptance. Bathroom use and pronouns are, of course, important issues. Recognizing one's existence and validating their belongings sends a powerful message about a transgender person's right to fully access the space. Trans individuals are humans. We are not single stance issues to choose a side on in political discourse or an uncomfortable object around which you must wrap your mind. So basically taking full steps to make sure that people who are trans are not only just given basic rights, but fully respected as humans in the workplace, in the school, and in larger contexts. Okay, my next point is to center marginalized voices. That's something that we're trying to do in all walks of life, but also when we're talking about LGBTQ+ people, we should always do that. One of the things is that when meeting people that are different or have identities that you're not familiar with, or even if you're very familiar, sometimes mistakes happen. Sometimes you'll say something that just doesn't come off right. You'll accidentally use the wrong pronoun, whatever it is. It's important to remember that mistakes do happen, but if they do, try not to make the situation too much about yourself. Center the people that are actually involved, that are who are being marginalized. If you apologize, do apologize. Acknowledge the wrong, acknowledge the hurt, but don't overdo it, because overdoing it can make it about yourself. I've included a fun article here, or not article, a comic of somebody that misgenders another person. And then over apologizes. Forsake me, I'm a horrible ally. It's just too much. Trying to just make sure you be cool in those situations and move forward. Another is be an advocate, but focus on amplifying LGBTQ+ voices and other marginalized voices, giving them the platform to the people that have the least privilege. So instead of sort of over speaking people that are marginalized with your words, try to find where others that are in the communities have spoken for themselves, and try not to paint with too broad of a brush. Not all LGBTQ people of any given identity are the same. There are lots of different sort of gray areas and ways that things mesh together. So just be sure to not speak over people that are trying to speak for themselves. Certainly take on the onus of political action, the onus of conversation and education, but if somebody's trying to speak, or if there are people that have already sort of spoken for themselves, amplify those voices, give them a platform. Okay, and we've already kind of talked at length about being an advocate versus, or being an advocate and an accomplice versus just being an ally. Here's sort of more information about that. Of course, being a good ally / accomplice means showing up politically, showing up in conversation with your family, with your friends, volunteering your time, your voice, your money, whatever you can to support causes that help the community, particularly those that are the most vulnerable. We talked about sort of homelessness, suicidality, all of those things amplify more and more with each sort of layer of more marginalized identities. Showing up for political action, obviously voting, it's more important now than ever. I guess we say that every year, but definitely showing up, contacting your representatives if you can, joining demonstrations, that sort of thing. And then also paying attention where you spend your money. Obviously, consumers can only do so much, but it's always helpful to be thoughtful about where you spend your money, where you put your sort of economic points. Trying to support LGBTQ+ businesses, also Black businesses, anything from marginalized voices who may be struggling to keep their businesses afloat, trying to support those and try to maybe funnel away your business from harmful companies that may be doing more hurt than good. Yeah, I've also included some causes if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to support. We've got the Ali Forney Center, they fight against homelessness among LGBTQ+ youth. GLSEN, who we're following for Solidarity Week, has a lot of really great tools, especially for educators. They're more focused for K through 12, but that doesn't mean that the resources aren't helpful. They are really, really cool. The Trevor Project, we quoted from their survey. They deal with suicidality among queer youth. Immigration equality also deals with LGBTQ+ immigrants and HIV positive immigrants, helping them with their particular needs. They are getting hit especially hard among immigrants with ICE and that sort of thing. The Sylvia Rivera Law Project, they're working to guarantee the right to self-determined gender identity, working on behalf of trans people. SAGE also works for older LGBTQ plus people and their caregivers. And then also Mermaids is for very young trans children and their families, helping give them resources and support. And then lastly, I've included crowd funds. Sadly, in America especially, we've got thousands upon thousands of people who really need help for emergency housing, healthcare, other needs, especially trans youth who don't really have anywhere to turn, and other LGBTQ kids that have sort of run away or become homeless. Sometimes their last plea is to get on GoFundMe. So you can always search those and sort of help out there. I've also got another quote that I pulled. So as a queer trans woman, my life is often misery. So when I see corporations or big name artists trying to tap into some sanitized version of my identity that's only about the fun parts, I feel alienated and that huge parts of my experience are erased. So that's kind of my quote for against rainbow capitalism, meaning companies that like to show up for the fun part or sell you things with rainbows on them, but aren't actually there for the political action. The harder parts or the need for change. It's more just sort of using it as another way to advertise. And I think it's a nice way of talking about being an ally. You don't want to just sort of show up for the pride parade. You also want to show up in other ways too, as a constant supporter. And then one of my last points is just never stop learning. You always want to make sure that you don't think again of allyship as something that's constant or immutable. It's something that's constantly requires action, constantly requires learning. It's something where you need to continue to keep listening and reading and learning. Things do change, but also there are always ways that we can learn more, or ways that maybe we thought we knew, but we didn't fully internalize, right? So always be flexible, willing to acknowledge when you've made a mistake or you still have room to grow. It's also important, I think, to join in with groups and forums where allies are welcome. Certainly don't, invade spaces where it's supposed to be private to people that are marginalized only. But if there's, a room for allies to come in and sort of learn and see and listen, then I think that's a great idea to sort of have that information coming to you, be immersed in the conversation when it happens. And then again, just remember to amplify, listen, and support. Okay, so that's really it for my presentation. I did just want to remind everybody of Solidarity Week 2020. Again, this is a virtual awareness event. So basically, we're following along with GLSEN. We're following with the focus days, giving some information about those different identities. How can you support them? How can you learn more about them? And what do they mean? We've also, again, got that National Coming Out Day event on Friday with the LGBTQ plus students of Lamar. So that's sure to be exciting. They have, from what I understand, a sort of decorated door where you can come and take pictures coming out. So that'll be great. Yeah, so check it out. We've already got Monday's post up, so you're welcome to learn more there. Other than that, if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate everybody coming out and sort of learning about LGBTQ plus issues and how to support. So thanks everybody.